Alright, out of the Regulatory Guide to Reference Guide to Regulatory Compliance, I'm reading the Truth in Savings Act, which is bound to start here on page 532. During the early 1970s, Congress became concerned with the confusion consumers face when shopping for deposit account products. In particular, it was concerned that consumers did not understand how interest paid on deposit accounts was calculated. For example, some institutions paid interest on the investable balance in the account, others paid on the full balance in the account. This lack of uniformity in terms made it difficult for a consumer to effectively compare different account offerings. These problems led to the passage of Truth in Savings Act in December of 1991. TISA requires depository institutions to disclose the fees, interest rate, annual percentage yield, and other account terms both before an account is open and at the request of the consumer. The law also governs information on the periodic statements and establishes rules for advertisements of deposit accounts. TISA is implemented by Regulation DD, Truth in Savings, which was issued by the Federal Reserve Board in September of 1992 and became effective in June of 1993. The Federal Reserve Board issued an official staff commentary to Regulation DD in June of 1994. In 2006, Regulation DD was amended to add requirements for accounts included in overdraft protection programs. The authority for Regulation DD was transferred to the CFPB in 2011. The coverage for the Truth in Savings Act is all depository institutions, including national banks, state banks, thrift institutions, and savings banks, yet it does not include securities firms and brokers that offer depository accounts. Accounts defined as any deposit account available to or held by a consumer that is a natural person that is primarily for personal, family, or household purposes at a depository institution. It includes both interest-bearing and non-interest-bearing accounts, time and demand accounts, and now negotiable order of withdrawal accounts. It includes IRAs, individual retirement accounts, and simplified employee pension SEP accounts. Includes payable on death or taught in trust accounts, yet does not apply to sole proprietorships doing business as accounts, nor does it apply to repurchase agreements or the purchase of other types of securities or accounts opened by non-resident aliens or accounts of U.S. residents at institutions outside the United States. For advertising purposes, coverage includes accounts held by or on behalf of a deposit broker if any interest in the account is held by or offered to a consumer. Advertisements are covered by the Truth in Savings Act, which covers any commercial message appearing in any medium that directly or indirectly promotes the availability of or a deposit in a new account. For purposes of overdraft protection and for purposes of requiring advertising to be accurate and not misleading, advertising includes a promotion of the terms of or a deposit in a new or existing account. The requirements under the Truth in Savings Act involve rate quotes, disclosures, what else? Restrictions on the payment of interest, advertising requirements, and that appears to be all we're going to discuss here. Rate quotes. In oral rate quotations, the bank must state the APY, annual percentage yield. The interest rate may be used also, but it cannot be used alone. No other rate may be quoted. Disclosures must be written in a clear and conspicuous manner and provided in the form the consumer can keep. Disclosures may be provided electronically, provided they are in compliance with the Consumer Consent and other provisions of the Electronic Signatures in Global and National Commerce Act, e-Sign Act. Now, within this very same sentence, we use the word customers and we use the word consumers. This Truth in Savings Act has already indicated that it is protects consumers and does not protect even your sole proprietor account. Must be purposed for family or household purposes. So just to keep that straight. For new account disclosures, there's some requirements for timing. There's 4 requirements for timing. 11 requirements for content. And we better start working through them. 1. Under timing. It must be provided to the consumer before an account is opened or a fee is assessed, whichever is earlier. 2. If consumer is not present when account is open, the disclosures must be mailed within 10 business days. A shopping disclosure must be provided to a consumer on request. If a requesting consumer is not physically present at the time of the request, for example, a telephone request, disclosures must be mailed within a reasonable time. If a request is made by electronic means, the bank must mail or deliver the disclosures within a reasonable time, either on paper or electronically if the consumer agrees. Excuse me. If an account is opened electronically by a consumer who is not present at the institution, the disclosures must be provided before the account is open or services provided. Content of new account disclosure. The APY and the interest rate using those terms. Time periods, the rates will be in effect for fixed rate accounts. 3. All applicable APYs and interest rates for tier rate accounts. 4. A single composite APY as well as the interest rates of and period of time each will be in effect for step rate accounts. Variable rate information. As applicable, the bank must state that an interest rate and annual percentage yield may change, how the interest rate is determined, the frequency with which the interest rate may change, and any limitation on the amount the interest rate may change, the frequency with which the interest is compounded and credited, and if the consumer closes the account before accrued interest is credited, a statement that the interest will not be paid if applicable, and balance information including A. Minimum balance requirements to open the account, avoid fees, or obtain the APY, B. Balance computation method, and C. When interest begins to accrue on non-cash deposits. 9, 10, and 11. 9. Fees that this is content of disclosures. Fees may be imposed in connection with the account, shall be disclosed, or an explanation of how the fee will be determined, and the conditions under which they can be imposed. Limitations, if any, on the number of amounts of deposits or withdrawals, and 11. The amount or type of any bonus, when it will be paid, and any minimum balance or time requirements to obtain the bonus. Time deposit disclosures are slightly different. New time account disclosures must include 1 through 5. 1. The maturity date. 2. The early withdrawal penalties, and within that statement that a penalty may or will be imposed, conditions under which the penalty may be assessed, and describe how the penalty will be calculated. 3rd, if compounding occurs and interest may be withdrawn before deposit until maturity, and that a withdrawal will reduce earnings. 4th, if the account has a maturity of greater than 1 year and does not compound interest on an annual or more frequent basis and requires at least annual payments of interest, then a statement that interest cannot remain on deposit and the payout of interest is mandatory. 5. Renewal policies. Whether or not the account will automatically renew at maturity. If it will, a statement of whether a grace period will be provided and its length, and if not, a statement of whether interest will be paid after maturity. Renewal notices. Automatically renewing updates under the time deposit disclosures. Timing. For automatically renewing time deposits that have maturities of longer than 1 month, a disclosure must be sent at least 30 calendar days before the renewal, or at least 20 calendar days before the end of the grace period. Contents. That's a really big disparity. A disclosure must be sent at least 30 days before the renewal, or at least 20 calendar days before the end of the grace period. Wow. Anyway, content. For accounts with maturities of longer than 1 year, the disclosure must include all information required on a new account disclosure for time deposits and also state the date the existing account matures. If the interest rate and APY are unknown, disclosures must state that fact and provide a date when this information will be determined and a telephone number to call to obtain the information. For accounts with maturities over 1 year or less but longer than 1 month, the disclosure must disclose at least the date the existing account matures and the new maturity date. Second, an interest rate and APY for the new account or a telephone number to call and the date when the information will be available. And lastly, any difference between the old account terms and the new account terms. And this is for accounts with maturities of 1 year or less, but longer than 1 month, to be included in the renewal notice. Maturity notices, lastly, non-automatically renewing deposits. For non-automatically renewing time deposits with a maturity of more than 1 year, the notice of maturity must be sent to the consumer at least 10 calendar days in advance of the scheduled maturity date. The notice of maturity must state the maturity date and whether interest will be paid on the funds after maturity. Change in terms notice under Truth in Savings Act. 1 through 6 points about the change in terms notice here. We must give a change in terms notice if a change will reduce the APY or adversely affect the consumer. The notice describing the change must state the effective date of the change. The change in terms notice must be sent at least 30 days before the effective date, and it's not required for interest rate changes or APY changes on variable rate accounts. No notice is required for changes in fees assessed by third parties for check printing, and change in terms notice not required for changes in any terms for time accounts with maturities of 1 month or less. Periodic statement disclosures. A periodic statement is one with account information except for a time account or passbook savings account, provided to the consumer on a regular basis at least 4 times per year. If the bank provides a periodic statement of the account, the following disclosures are required. You have 1 through 6 on this page. 1. Annual percentage yield earned during the statement period using that term calculated according to Appendix A of Reg DD. B. Amount of interest earned during the statement period. C. Fees imposed during the statement period, itemized by type and dollar amounts. If the same fee is imposed more than once in the statement period, those fees may be grouped together and a total dollar amount for the type of fee disclosed. However, certain fees may not be grouped together, such as overdraft fees and return check fees. Which is kind of silly because I really can't imagine, there's the overdraft fees have to be grouped together at the bottom of the statement. And I don't know where else within the statement they would be grouped together outside of that. And so other fees, not including overdraft or NSF fees, being grouped together, I just can't picture that in my mind what that would look like. So this is just a very odd way of discussing the overdraft and NSF fees disclosure box on the periodic statement. But as of 2011 or so, it's a requirement that we aggregate the amount of overdraft fees and return check fees that were charged during the period and then also year to date. The number of days this is number 4, number of days in the statement period are the beginning and ending dates of the period. 5th, the consumer and the bank may agree to send or accept periodic statement disclosures electronically. And 6th, overdraft protection disclosures. Periodic statement policies must include A and B. A, the total dollar amount for all fees or charges imposed on the account for paying checks when the account has insufficient funds, and B, the total dollar amount for all fees imposed on the account for returning items unpaid. So there it is. These disclosures must be provided for the statement period and the calendar year to date. The overdraft fees must be in close proximity to other fee disclosures on the statement, including a format similar to the model form. And the term total overdraft fees must be used to label this disclosure. So I'm just guessing that the other point here that was being made was that if you're going to group other fees together to do it away from the required overdraft fee box. Subsection C, restrictions on the payment of interest. 1, 2, and 3. 1. We must calculate interest on the full amount of principal in the account for each day by the daily balance method or average daily balance method. The same method must be used to determine any minimum balance required to earn interest. 2. Interest must begin to accrue not later than the business day specified in the Expedited Funds Availability Act. And 3. Institutions are not required to compound or credit interest at a particular frequency. Right. But it needs to be disclosed what compounding or credit frequency is being used. Advertising requirements under subsection D goes on to discuss 12 different requirements. 1, that they cannot be misleading or inaccurate. 2, that they cannot misrepresent the institution's deposit contract. 3, that they may not describe an account as free or no cost if any maintenance or activity fee may be charged. 4, that they may not use the word profit in referring to interest paid on an account. 5, if any rate of return is quoted, it must be stated as the APY. And if it's being abbreviated, it also has to be defined. The interest rate may be stated in conjunction with the APY as long as it is not more conspicuous. The APY must be expressed in 2 decimal places. 6. In the case of electronic advertising, if both the APY and interest rate are stated, they must appear on the same location so they can be viewed simultaneously. The institution may not use a link to connect them. 7. If the APY is stated in an advertisement, the following must also be stated clearly and conspicuously. This is A through F, 1 through 6. A. If the account has a variable rate, the fact that the rate may change. B. The period of time the APY is in effect, or a statement that the APY is accurate as of a specified date. C. The minimum balance required to earn APY. D. For tiered rate accounts, the minimum balance for each tier must equal in proximity and prominence as applicable APY. And E. The minimum deposit required to open the account if greater than the minimum balance required to earn the APY, and a statement that fees could reduce the earnings on the account. Additional time deposit advertising requirements. The term of the account, the statement that a penalty will or may be imposed for early withdrawal, and for non-compounding time accounts with maturities greater than 1 year that require interest payouts at least annually and do not compound interest more frequently than annually, a statement that interest cannot remain on deposit and that payout of interest is mandatory. 9. If a bonus is included. 10. In the case of electronic advertising, except for the fact that the APY and interest rate must be in the same location, other required disclosures must be connected to the triggering terms in the link. By a link, I should say. Exemptions from advertising requirements. That's for broadcast and electronic media such as television and radio, telephone response machines, and outdoor media. You have 1 through 7, a statement that variable rate may change, the period of time the APY will be offered, the minimum opening deposit, the statement regarding the effective fees on the account, and the early withdrawal penalty statement, the minimum balance required to obtain a bonus, and when the bonus will be provided. Those are all exemptions. And indoor signs. Generally, signs that are inside the bank's premises are intended for indoor reading and are not subject to any advertising requirements except that they may not be misleading or inaccurate. They may not refer to an account as free or no cost if there is a maintenance fee or maintenance charge on the account, and must use the APY or APY and interest rate together. They must also contain a statement advising customers to contact the bank employee for further information about applicable fees and terms. Right. Those electronic broadcast, TV or radio, media, you're exempt from providing all those disclosures, but I do think that there needs to be another bullet in here that only occurs if you're giving your, website or telephone number to get that information, but I could be wrong since it's not written here. 12, advertising requirements for overdraft protection comes with a couple, quite a few add-on requirements. Let's start with promoting the payment of overdrafts must make the following additional disclosures in a clear and conspicuous manner. That's 1 through 4. 1, the fee or fees for the payment of each overdraft. 2, the categories of transactions for which a fee for paying an overdraft that may be imposed. C, the time period by which the consumer must repay an overdraft. And 4, the circumstances under which the institution may not pay an overdraft. And advertisements promoting overdraft protections that trigger these disclosures include periodic statement messages of overdraft limit, and 2, statement of the account balance that contains overdraft limit, for example, an ATM receipt or a telephone response machine. This gets more specific. These additional disclosures do not apply to advertisements for overdraft protection plans that are made in writing and are subject to Reg Z, a communication by an institution about the payment of overdrafts in response to a consumer-initiated inquiry, an advertisement made through broadcast or electronic media such as television or radio, outdoor media advertisements such as billboards, ATM receipts. 6, in-person discussion of the consumer. 7, disclosure required by federal and other applicable law. 8, information included on a periodic statement or a notice informing a customer about a specific overdrawn item or the amount an account is overdrawn. 9, a term in a deposit account agreement discussing the institution's right to pay overdrafts. 10, a notice provided to a consumer, such as an ATM, informing the consumer that completing a transaction will trigger a fee for overdrawing the account, or a general notice that items overdrawing an account may trigger a fee. Informational or educational materials concerning the payment of overdrafts, provided the materials do not specifically describe the overdraft service, and an opt-out or opt-in notice regarding the institution's payment of overdrafts or provision of discretionary overdraft services based on Reg E requirements. And ATM screens and telephone response machines, advertisements on such do not have to include 1 or 2. 1, the categories of transactions for which a fee for paying an overdraft may be imposed, or the circumstances in which an institution will not pay an overdraft. Indoor signs are not subject to advertising requirements for overdraft protection services. And F, if balances are disclosed through an automated system, they may not include amounts the institution considers to cover overdrafts, whether through an overdraft privilege program, open-end credit account that is subject to Reg Z, or an agreement to transfer funds from another account. Other balances may be disclosed that include these additional amounts if the institution prominently states that the balance includes such amounts, and if applicable, that such amounts are not available for all transactions. Retail sweep accounts where funds may be transferred between sub-accounts to cover overdrafts as opposed to link accounts are not covered by this rule. Record retention, keep them for 2 years. After the data disclosure must be made. And the enforcements are your regular FIRA enforcement actions.